Welcome to the History in Focus channel. Be sure to subscribe so you don't miss more videos like this one.
Hollywood sold the Old West as a land of adventure, freedom, and equal opportunity for all. But for thousands of women trapped in the brothels of the American frontier, that world was a trap with no visible way out. Incurable diseases, unpunished violence, forced addiction, and institutional abandonment were the routine of every single day. 20 documented facts about the most brutal and silenced reality of that era that no movie script had the courage to show with honesty. Fact number 1. The majority of prostitutes in the Old West did not reach 35 years of age. It is not dramatic exaggeration. It is what the death records of cities like Dodge City and Tombstone show with documentary clarity. Tuberculosis, infections without adequate treatment, everyday violence, and physical exhaustion consumed those bodies at a very accelerated pace. For every story of a woman who managed to escape, there were dozens who simply disappeared from the records without leaving any trace at all. While the life expectancy of an American woman in the East already surpassed 50 years, a prostitute on the frontier lived on average until 28. Data gathered from municipal cemeteries in Deadwood, Denver, and Virginia City reveal entire rows of nameless graves, marked with a number or a wooden stake rotting in the hard ground. Most died without anyone claiming the body for a funeral. No family present, no record, no mourning whatsoever. The most common cause of death was not the bullet of a violent and drunk client. It was tuberculosis, called at the time simply chest disease. Damp dormitories without ventilation, with several women sharing the same contaminated air for months on end, were perfect cauldrons for the disease to spread without any obstacle. A woman who started coughing blood in the low-tier brothels had weeks, not months of life remaining, and nobody paid for a doctor for her. The Old West buried its dead women in so-called potter's fields, public pauper cemeteries, where the nameless and resourceless were deposited side by side in the same dry ground. Without headstones, without religious ceremony, without an obituary published in a newspaper. While the press of the era covered in detail the death of every sheriff or famous gunslinger, the death of a prostitute barely deserved 2 lines of text. When it deserved any at all, they were invisible in life and completely erased after death. Fact number 2. Historians estimate that more than half of the prostitutes in the Old West carried some active venereal disease. Syphilis and gonorrhea circulated through the brothels without obstacle. There were no antibiotics, there were no mandatory regular examinations, there was no quarantine of any kind. An infected woman continued working because stopping meant not eating and increasing the debt. The disease progressed in silence until the body simply could not take it anymore. Syphilis was the most devastating of all the diseases circulating in the brothels. In the first stage, a small sore that healed on its own and completely fooled the untrained eye. In the second, skin patches and fever that resembled some other unrelated disease. In the final stage, years later, it attacked the nervous system, causing progressive dementia, paralysis, and slow, humiliating death. Doctors called the condition general paralysis of the insane and rarely associated it with syphilis. It was too much shame to put on paper. The available treatment was mercury-based, ingested, inhaled, or applied directly on the skin lesions. The theory was that mercury purified the blood and expelled the infection. In practice, it poisoned the entire organism. The effects included progressive loss of teeth, bone necrosis, permanent tremors, and kidney failure. Women subjected to repeated treatment ended up in worse condition than those who treated nothing at all. The cure killed more slowly than the disease itself. The cruelest part of this entire equation was the closed cycle with absolutely no way out. The disease progressively reduced the woman's beauty and work capacity. The consequent drop in income led to worse and cheaper brothels. Worse brothels meant more exposure to infections, more diseases, and even more aggressive and damaging treatments. A healthy woman at 20 could be unrecognizable at 25. The system had no room for recovery. It was designed only to consume and discard in that exact order. Fact number 3. Avoiding a pregnancy in the Old West was nearly impossible for the vast majority of prostitutes. Condoms existed, but they were made from sheep intestines or pig bladder, were expensive, and were rarely used in practice. Clients who did not want to pay the extra cost simply refused without negotiation. The women resorted to douches with highly corrosive substances like concentrated vinegar, zinc sulfate, and boric acid, which caused severe internal burns and recurrent infections without treatment. When contraception failed in any way, what remained were the pharmacy or folk recipe abortifacients. Teas made from tansy, pennyroyal, and rue were consumed in dangerous doses, well beyond what any plant could safely tolerate when ingested. Frontier pharmacies sold menstrual regulators, a catalog euphemism for compounds that contained arsenic, strychnine, and lead in their commercial formulation. The women drank them and prayed to survive the side effects. Many did not survive. The death certificate recorded fever. Clandestine surgical abortions were performed by midwives without adequate training or by charlatans who operated literally in the dark, in back rooms. without effective anesthesia, without sterilized instruments, without antibiotics to fight post-procedure infections. Hemorrhage and sepsis killed within days. Records from Tombstone estimate that 1 in every 5 prostitutes died from complications directly related to pregnancy or poorly conducted abortion. The cruel irony is that the luxury brothels, the so-called parlor houses that served men of wealth, had access to better contraceptive methods and some minimum level of health care for their most profitable women. It was the crib girls, the poorest and most vulnerable prostitutes, who bore the full weight of this reality without any type of available protection. The poorer the woman, the greater the risk that an unplanned pregnancy would become a death sentence. The frontier always charged more from those who already had absolutely nothing. Fact number 4. Laudanum was as common in the brothels of the Old West as whiskey in the saloons. This mixture of opium dissolved in alcohol was sold freely in pharmacies across the territory and advertised in newspapers as a remedy for pain, anxiety, and insomnia without apparent cause. Inside the brothels, pimps and madams distributed it strategically, not out of compassion for the women, but out of cold financial calculation. A drugged woman complains less, works more, and does not run away. The process of creating dependence was deliberate and methodical, planned like any other control strategy. Women who arrived with traumas were introduced to opium as temporary relief for pain. Then, as part of the daily routine, within weeks the dependence was installed irreversibly. From that point on, the drug became the most efficient invisible chain, better than any lock or guard. To get the next dose, she needed the pimp, and he knew it. Morphine entered the scene after the Civil War, when military doctors used it massively in the treatment of wounded soldiers in the field. It arrived in frontier towns as a legitimate pharmaceutical product, and quickly found its way inside the brothels. More potent than common opium, it created faster and deeper dependence. Medical records from Denver in the 1880s show that the majority of women admitted for morphine dependence came directly from houses of prostitution. A woman addicted to opium or morphine was a woman permanently trapped, even if the doors of the brothel were wide open. Without income, without family, without access to medical care of any kind, withdrawal was unbearable physical suffering, cramps, fever, convulsions. Many returned to the brothel because it was the only place that provided the drug without demanding explanations. The addiction transformed the prison into a place of apparent choice. On the inside, it was pure and calculated despair. Fact number 5. No woman arrived at the brothel without owing money. It was the rule, not the exception of the system. The owner charged for the passage to the town, for the clothes required for work, for the bed, for the food, and even for the water used in the daily bath. This initial debt could reach the equivalent of 6 months' wages of a common manual laborer. And it grew each following week with interest that no signed contract had ever clearly specified. The system was mathematically designed to never balance in the woman's favor. She paid part of the debt with her work, but the owner also deducted the cost of new clothes purchased mandatorily from the brothel's own store, the police fees paid in her name, the room rent increased monthly, and fines for behavior deemed inadequate. Accounting records from brothels in Virginia City show that no prostitute settled her debt in the first 2 years. Most never settled it at all. It was slavery with paperwork and a different name. Unlike the formal slavery abolished in 1865, this system had no officially registered name, but it operated with the same logic of absolute control. The woman could not leave the brothel while she owed. There was no court that would recognize her complaint as legitimate. There was no law that protected her wages. The owner held all the cards: the drug, the debt, the violence, and the threat of turning her over to the police for vagrancy that same night. The clearest sign that the system was entirely intentional was in the numbers themselves. Brothels that charged ridiculously low amounts from the women ensured that the income would never cover the inflated costs of the fabricated debt. Some madams were as calculating as any Wall Street banker. The difference was that the product given as collateral had a name, a face, and feelings, and could not go anywhere. Fact number 6. Beatings in Old West brothels were so frequent that they rarely generated police reports. When they did, the report was filed without investigation within hours. Drunk clients who felt they had not received the expected service took the refund with their fists. Pimps who needed to demonstrate authority over the group chose a woman at random to serve as an example to the others. The violence was not punishment for something specific. It was maintenance of order. Pimps developed over time calculated violence techniques designed to hurt without leaving visible marks, especially on the face, which was the main commercial asset of any woman in the brothel. Blows to the abdomen, burns in places covered by clothing, and systematic deprivation of sleep and food were methods documented in the few accounts that reached us. The brutality was precise and surgical, and the woman learns quickly that screaming only makes things worse. Client violence followed a different logic. It was impulsive, alcohol-fueled, and completely unpredictable. Men who arrived armed turned any disagreement into an immediate risk to life. In Virginia City, records from 1875 show that in 12 months, 6 prostitutes were shot by clients inside or in the vicinity of brothels. 2 died. No man was arrested or brought to trial. The law understood that the risk was part of the chosen occupation. The most revealing thing is what simply does not exist in the archives: formal complaints filed by prostitutes against their aggressors, not because the assaults did not happen on a daily scale, but because filing the complaint was useless or too dangerous to be worth the attempt. The sheriff could detain the woman for vagrancy on the spot. The pimp punished any reporting with immediate worsening of work conditions. The aggressor client could come back. Silence was the only available survival strategy. Fact number 7. Prostitutes murdered in the Old West rarely generated serious investigations of any kind. In Deadwood, records from the 1870s and 1880s show that at least 12 brothel women were found dead under clearly violent circumstances. In only 2 cases was there a formal trial, and none was there a conviction. The life of a prostitute was not worth the paper needed to carefully record the crime. It was convenient for everyone that the matter died along with her. The sheriff's archives in Tombstone for the period between 1879 and 1886 record 23 violent deaths of women connected to the city's sex trade. The standard description in the documents was death from unknown causes or deceased by accident without further details. The suspects rarely had a full name recorded. They were described as unknown man passing through or simply ignored entirely in the report. The system did not investigate what it officially preferred not to know. The total impunity created an environment of constant and diffuse threat that did not need words to function. Women who witnessed the death of colleagues understood the message without anyone needing to say it out loud a single time. Speaking could mean being the next one, and the aggressor knew this and counted on it. Some pimps used selective and visible killings as a way to keep the rest of the brothel under total control. Terror worked better than any physical chain. Fact number 8. In the majority of Old West towns, prostitution operated in a legal gray zone that left the women completely unprotected by design. It was not exactly legal, but it was widely tolerated, as long as it generated regular revenue for the local authorities. This ambiguity was intentional and convenient. A formally regulated activity would give rights to the women. A merely tolerated activity gave only payment obligations. The authorities preferred to charge without needing to protect. When a prostitute tried to resort to the law in search of minimal protection, the system turned her inside out immediately. She was treated as the defendant, not as the victim of the situation. She could be arrested for vagrancy, for public disorder, or for immoral behavior. Charges vague enough to apply to any situation the sheriff wanted to end quickly. The aggressor went home. She went to the cell. And upon leaving, she owed the pimp for the days she had not worked. Some cities created formal prostitution regulations at the end of the 19th century, presented to the public as a measure of public morality. In practice, they served to better control and tax. In Fort Worth and El Paso, prostitutes were required to register, pay fixed fees, and undergo periodic medical examinations. Clients, never. If the woman was diagnosed with a disease, she lost her license and continued working illegally, now without any protection whatsoever. It was taxation disguised as public health. Fact number 9. Police officers and sheriffs of the Old West treated brothels as a source of supplementary income as regular as their own official salary. The bribe was paid with the same regularity as rent. In Abilene, city council records from the 1870s show that the city charged a tolerance fee of $50 per month per operating brothel. But police officers charged yet another fee on the side, directly from the women. 2 collection systems, no concrete protection. The bribe did not buy real protection. It bought temporary tolerance, revocable at any moment. Without prior notice, a raid could sweep the brothel and arrest all the women present. It usually happened when some local politician needed a public gesture of morality before an election, or when the sheriff wanted to demonstrate authority over the district. The women were detained, fined, paying into the same system that arrested them, and released to restart the cycle the following week. Prostitutes who tried to operate outside the bribe scheme or who created any kind of problem for the authorities were pursued with determination and without embarrassment. They could be arrested repeatedly on charges fabricated on the spot, have rooms raided in the middle of the night, and belongings confiscated without receipt or explanation. The police officer who beat a prostitute did not even need a minimally plausible pretext. The law protected the uniform of the one who struck, not the body of the one who was struck. The result was an extra layer of exploitation stacked on top of all the others already existing. In addition to paying the pimp, honoring the fabricated debts, and sustaining the operation of the brothel, the woman also directly financed the corruption of the law that should have protected her in any situation. Every client who paid her, she passed a fraction onto the system that kept her trapped. It was a perfect extraction machine. Everyone received something, only she was left with nothing at the end of every night. Fact number 10. Once publicly identified as a prostitute, the woman was excluded from respectable society for the rest of her entire life. regardless of what she did afterward. Churches refused her presence at Sunday services. General stores refused to serve her at the counter. Schools did not accept her children in the classrooms. In many Western towns, there were streets that prostitutes could not frequent at certain times of the day. The exclusion had an address in the force of unwritten law. The social branding was permanent and spread collectively beyond the branded woman. It did not affect only her. It affected anyone who tried to associate with her publicly. A family that accepted her back ran a real risk of being excluded along with her. A merchant who served her with normalcy and courtesy could lose clients within the same week. A doctor who treated her with dignity was looked upon with suspicion. The stigma contaminated everything around it like a permanent stain. Some women tried to reinvent their own identity by moving to distant cities, inventing stories of early widowhood to explain the absence of a husband and a life without ties. It worked as long as nobody dug deep enough. But in a West, where everyone had connections via stagecoaches, telegraphs, and networked local newspapers, the lie often arrived in the new city before the woman herself. A letter sent from the previous address destroyed in days what had taken months to build. Fact number 11. The cribs, low-tier prostitution cubicles scattered across the Old West, were structures of raw lumber without solid foundation, without functional windows, and without any connected sewage system. They measured on average less than 43 square feet of total space. They were damp in winter, suffocating during summer, and permanently saturated with bodies, cheap cigarette smoke, and low-quality disinfectant. It was the permanent address of the women the hierarchy had discarded. The lack of adequate ventilation turned the cribs into chambers of accelerated respiratory disease. Tuberculosis, pneumonia, and skin infections spread from one cubicle to the next through the poorly fitted, crack-filled wooden wall. There was no individual bathroom. A basin and water pitcher were the available sanitary system for basic hygiene. In mining towns like Virginia City and Leadville, the cribs were located in the lowest areas, where the sewage from the streets above naturally drained down. The problem worsened severely during winter in the Rocky Mountains. Without adequate heating of any kind, the women burned whatever they could find to survive the intense cold. Medical records from Leadville document cases of carbon monoxide poisoning in cribs where a fire had been lit without minimal ventilation. Some women died in their sleep, without even realizing what was happening around them. It was institutionalized neglect called personal choice by society. Clean water was another constant problem with no real available solution. Clean and safe for drinking. It was expensive and rationed for those who could not pay. Lower value cribs used water from wells contaminated by nearby untreated sewage. Cholera and typhus were not rarities in the prostitution districts of mining towns. They were perfectly documented endemics in the records of the era. When an epidemic swept through a crib district, the city's reaction was to close the streets on the outside, not to treat the women inside. Fact number 12. There was no weekend in the brothel. There was no holiday, no sick day, no day off for exhaustion, mourning, or any other recognizable human reason. 7 days a week, without exception, the woman worked under direct threat of expulsion, automatic increase of debt, or physical punishment if she showed any sign of resistance. In high-turnover brothels serving mining camps, a woman could receive between 15 and 20 clients per day, every week. Fevers, infections, and accumulated chronic pain were not recognized by any pimp as a legitimate reason to stop working. Owners of smaller brothels calculated income per head, and any drop in production was interpreted as deliberate refusal subject to immediate punishment. The woman who insisted on resting due to illness was punished financially with an increase in debt, or physically without warning. Doctors who recommended rest were forbidden from returning to the establishment. Profit came before everything. The accumulated physical wear without any break became visible quickly and permanently. Women who arrived at the brothels in reasonable health aged visibly in 2 or 3 years of uninterrupted work. The combination of excessive work, 7 days a week, poor nutrition, sleep deprivation, forced chemical dependence, and constant exposure to infections deteriorated the body at a speed far above normal. At 25 years old, a woman who had entered at 18 easily looked 40. The bitter irony is that the work without pause accelerated exactly what the brothel owner wanted at all costs to avoid: the premature aging that drastically reduced the woman's commercial value on the market. It was a system that accelerated the destruction of its own product while exploiting it to the maximum possible. But for the owner, the logic made perfect sense. Extract the maximum while there was value to extract and replace with another when the value was exhausted. Women were raw material, not investment. Fact number 13. Theft was a natural extension of the everyday violence in Old West brothels, and almost as frequent as the violence itself. Clients took money, jewelry, clothes, and personal belongings from the women with the same naturalness with which they grabbed their hat from the hook on the way out. The robbed woman had 2 practical options: accept the loss without complaining or try to complain. Complaining to the pimp generated punishment for causing unnecessary trouble. complaining to the police generated laughter and possible arrest. Personal belongings carried emotional weight that went far beyond the material value of any object. Family letters carefully kept under the mattress, yellowed photographs that were the only traces of a life before the brothel, amulets and rings that represented still living connections to the world outside. When taken by a client, they were not just stolen objects. They were the last proof that that woman had been another person before arriving in that room. In some cases, the theft was deliberately cruel. Higher prestige brothels tried to protect their most profitable employees, not out of humanity or genuine compassion, but out of calculated commercial interest. A prostitute who lost her valuable belongings and her well-kept appearance lost a significant part of her attraction for the highest-paying clients. Some madams installed double locks and required men to leave weapons at the entrance. But in common brothels and in all the cribs, no real protection existed. The vulnerability was absolute and permanent. The most revealing detail about the thefts is that no police record of the era treated them as a crime worthy of investigation. In the archives of police stations in cities like Abilene and Cheyenne from the period, the category theft in brothel simply does not exist as a classification. The cases that eventually appeared were recorded as commercial disagreement or filed without any formal classification. The official language erased the crime before any attempt was even made to investigate it. Fact number 14. The racial hierarchy in Old West brothels was as rigid and merciless as any other social structure of 19th century America. Black, Mexican, and Chinese women occupied the lowest strata of the system. They earned less for the same work, operated in worse conditions, suffered even more unpunished violence, and had even more limited access to any available form of legal or social protection. It was oppression within oppression, layer upon layer. Chinese prostitutes in the cities of the West Coast and the Rocky Mountains were frequently victims of explicit and documented human trafficking. Many had been purchased in China by American agents with promises of honest work and a better life. Upon arriving at the port of San Francisco, they were publicly auctioned in Chinatown for amounts between $40 and $100. The buyer took them to the interior, to isolated mining camps where they were forced to work with no possible legal way out. Black prostitutes in the South and the West faced an additional and systematic brutality without parallel. They were barred from working in the most lucrative brothels that served middle-class white men. Relegated to strictly segregated establishments, they earned fractions of what white women received for the exact same services rendered. Records from New Orleans and Texas cities show that black prostitutes paid the same mandatory police bribes while receiving literally half the paid protection. Violence against women of racial minorities was treated with even less seriousness and urgency by local authorities than any other type of crime. In southwestern cities like Tucson and El Paso, violent deaths of Mexican prostitutes rarely even reached the stage of formal registration on paper. The life of a poor, non-white prostitute woman was worth zero in the moral and legal calculus of the American frontier. Disposable by race, by class, and by profession, a triple invisibility without recorded precedent. Fact number 15. What today we call, without hesitation, human trafficking was an open and widely documented practice in the Old West. Women, especially recent immigrants from China, Mexico, and parts of Europe, were bought, sold, and transferred between brothel owners like any other commodity of commercial value. There was no federal law criminalizing this practice before 1910, when the Mann Act was passed. For decades, the market operated in a completely free and open manner. The trafficking of Chinese women was the most organized, the most profitable, and the most brutal of all the systems in operation. Networks operating between Canton and San Francisco recruited poor, rural families with promises of honest and paid work for their daughters in prosperous America. Upon arrival, the women were publicly auctioned in San Francisco's Chinatown for amounts between $40 and $100 in cash. The buyer took them to the interior, to mining camps, where isolated brothels had no way out. The Presbyterian Mission of San Francisco, founded in 1874, carefully documented the rescue of hundreds of these women over decades of operation. Its historical records describe girls between 12 and 16 years old who had crossed the entire Pacific, believing they were going to work as domestic servants in respectable American homes. They arrived to find a crib room and an unpayable debt already calculated. Many did not speak English, they could not ask for help, and would not understand the answer, even if it came. The trafficking was not limited to foreign women from abroad. American orphans living on the streets, runaways from severe domestic violence, and girls in extreme poverty were recruited by agents actively operating in eastern cities. The promises were of honest work as a seamstress, cook, or teacher in new territory. The trip was paid for as bait. The arrival revealed the planned lie. And the deliberately inflated fare debt ensured that the promised fresh start would turn into a permanent trap. Fact number 17. Respectable doctors of the Old West frequently refused categorically to see prostitutes in their offices or to make visits to the brothels. It was not for lack of available payment. It was out of real fear of the community's social judgment. A doctor seen regularly entering a brothel for consultations risked losing patients from the town's most respectable families within weeks. Professional reputation mattered more than the woman's health, so she simply went without any care at all. When a doctor eventually agreed to see a prostitute inside or outside the brothel, he generally charged double or triple the normal rate for other patients. Some charged in services instead of money directly. Accounting records from Denver brothels in the 1880s show payments to doctors listed in the columns, simply as favors rendered without specification. Medicine was yet another form of exploitation. In a system built entirely upon the vulnerability of the weakest, women with perfectly treatable infections went without care until the condition became severe or irreversible. A gonorrhea detected early and treated adequately turned into chronic pelvic infection through simple lack of available basic care. Rib fractures, caused by violence, healed in the wrong position and caused permanent pain that never went away. Open wounds became infected without adequate cleaning. Medical neglect was as lethal as direct violence. It just killed more slowly and with fewer witnesses present. The Protestant missionaries who operated in frontier towns were, in many documented cases, the only health caregivers who attended to prostitutes without charging and without passing judgment. In San Francisco, the Presbyterian mission offered basic care and attempted to rescue women from the trafficking networks, isolated initiatives, without sufficient resources, and frequently blocked by brothel owners who did not want to lose their workforce to a charitable institution with limited power of action. Fact number 18. In the brothel market of the Old West, 25 was the age at which a woman began to lose commercial value in a noticeable way. At 30, she was considered old for the business by the majority of owners. At 35, if she was still alive, she was in the worst imaginable conditions or had been forced out of the business long ago. The accumulated physical and emotional wear accelerated aging in a visible way. A 28-year-old woman easily looked 40. The fall through the brothel hierarchy was relentless, progressive, and completely without any possible return. A parlor house girl who lost beauty or health descended to lower prestige and lower income saloons. From there, to the cribs without ventilation and without protection. From the cribs to the street. Each step down represented worse conditions, lower income, more frequent violence, and even scarcer protection. There was no retirement, there were no accumulated savings, there was no support network of any kind waiting at the end. The most common fate for prostitutes discarded by the system was begging on the streets or work as a laundress, one of the few jobs that a woman without verifiable references could obtain without questions. Some became employees in smaller brothels, cooking and cleaning for younger women, who repeated the exact same cycle. A handful had real luck and married clients or set up small businesses of their own. They were rare exceptions that confirmed the brutal rule of the overwhelming discarded majority. The historical records of Helena, Montana show that fewer than 10% of the city's prostitutes between 1865 and 1886 had a documented trajectory of any stability after leaving the profession. The other 90% simply disappear from the archives, without a published obituary, without a registered address, without a trace in any official document. The frontier consumed them in silence and discarded them in the same way, as it did with everything that no longer had immediate commercial utility. Fact number 19. Children born in Old West brothels grew up in an environment that the surrounding society completely pretended did not exist. Historical records from cities like Deadwood and Denver document dozens of births in brothels per year, throughout the 1870s and 1880s consistently. Few of those babies had a recognized father in any document. Many had mothers so dependent on opium that they could barely minimally take care of themselves. Being born in the brothel was starting life already at the lowest available point. Local authorities and churches periodically organized removals of children from brothels, presented to the public as acts of mercy and child protection. In practice, many went to orphanages where the conditions were only slightly better. Siblings were separated without ceremony. Contact with the mother was forbidden as institutional rule. Some children were given for adoption without any recognizable legal process, for amounts between $5 and $20 paid on the spot. Rescue was the name. Commerce was the actual practice. Children who remained in the brothels for lack of alternative grew up invisible to the surrounding society. Girls were frequently initiated into the work before the age of 15, not by their own decision, but by direct pressure from the same owners who controlled the mother with the same tools as always. The cycle closed upon itself with mechanical precision. The brothel reproduced the brothel from generation to generation. The daughter was born inside a structure that nobody had chosen, and almost nobody managed to break free from. Some mothers resisted with everything they still had in strength. They tried to hide their daughters, send them far away with any trusted person, deny the brothel one more victim for the cycle to repeat. Records from the Presbyterian Mission of San Francisco describe women who walked miles in the cold to deliver young daughters to charitable institutions, not as abandonment, but as the only act of protection still within reach. It was the greatest proof of love that system allowed. the definitive and painful separation. Fact number 20. For the women who managed to leave prostitution, and they were a small minority, physical freedom was profoundly incomplete. The social stigma followed them like a permanent shadow. It did not matter how much time had passed, where they had gone, or who they had become with effort. A former neighbor recognizing the face, a former client encountered by chance, a rumor arriving at the new address. Anything destroyed in a few days what had taken months to build from scratch. Marriage was the most desired way out, and at the same time, the most difficult to achieve safely. Men willing to marry former prostitutes existed, but they were rare and frequently the worst possible candidates for any woman. Exploiters who saw in the vulnerability a permanent form of control and humiliation. The cruel logic was known by the women themselves with bitter clarity. A good man would not marry you. Any man who accepted wanted something beyond simple companionship. Honest jobs were equally blocked. Teachers needed solid character references signed by known individuals. Seamstresses worked in social environments where the past came to light quickly. Domestic work was one of the few half-open doors. But any employer who discovered the employee's history fired her the same day. The legitimate job market had its own invisible walls, built with others' shame, used as a tool of permanent and silent exclusion. The most revealing thing in the accounts that reached us is the lucid clarity with which these women understood their own situation. Diaries preserved by the Presbyterian Mission show that they knew exactly what the permanent stigma meant for every possibility of a future life. When they managed to leave the brothel, they found a world that had already decided who they were before they opened their mouths. The stigma was the last prison, the only one without walls, without a lock, and without a visible fixed address.